Back in 2005, long before superhero fatigue set in and cinematic universes became stitched together like patchwork quilts of mediocrity, Constantine arrived as something of an anomaly. Directed by Francis Lawrence in his feature film debut and starring Keanu Reeves fresh off the Matrix trilogy, this supernatural noir didn't exactly follow the holy scripture of DC's Hellblazer comics. Gone was the blonde, Liverpudlian warlock scoundrel from the panels, replaced by a slick-haired, black-clad Californian exorcist with the haunted eyes of a man who's literally been to hell and back. And yet, despite this blasphemy against the source material, Constantine managed something rather miraculous. It delivered a dark, stylish, and infinitely rewatchable tale that has only grown in appreciation over time. Set in a world where angels and demons wage an unseen cold war over the souls of humanity, the film introduces us to a man cursed with the gift or affliction of second sight. John Constantine, a chain-smoking exorcist who once took his own life and, as a result, is damned to hell. His mission, buy back his soul by deporting every demon he can back to the pit they crawled out of, all while navigating the treacherous middle ground between heaven's indifference and hell's ambition. But when a troubled detective named Angela Dodson comes to him for help investigating her twin sister's death, the layers begin to peel back, revealing an apocalyptic conspiracy, an unstable balance between good and evil, and an angel with a god complex.
If sweet God loves you so, then I'll make you worthy of it.
The inciting incident is more than a personal tragedy. It's the spark that reignites Constantine's descent into a world of damned souls, scheming half-breeds, divine politics, and ancient relics. What follows is a story that blends detective noir with theological horror, gothic spectacle, and comic book drama. It's part The Exorcist, part Blade Runner, with a metaphysical flair of The Matrix and a dry wit that somehow still manages to land amidst all the existential dread. What Constantine lacks in comic book accuracy more than makes up for in atmosphere, performance, and thematic weight. Keanu Reeves might not be Alan Moore's ideal John Constantine, but he embodies this version with weary stoicism, sardonic charm, and a pain-soaked soul you can feel in every cough and sigh. The world he inhabits is rich with visual symbolism and spiritual decay, from seedy occult artifacts to the scorched wasteland of hell. Depicted as a wind-blasted mirror of our own Earth, everything oozes mood, style, and tone. Thematically, the film wrestles with damnation, redemption, the illusion of free will, and the bureaucratic coldness of both heaven and hell. It paints a deeply cynical portrait of divinity, where angels are manipulative and demons are opportunistic, and humans, as always, are stuck in the middle. It's a movie that wasn't made to launch a franchise, but to carve out its own haunted corner of the genre, and nearly 2 decades later, it still stands as one of the most underrated supernatural films of its era.
Sure about this?
No.
Hey guys, what's happening? Nihat here with Film Comics Explained, and today we're breaking down the production history, the story and characters, as well as explaining the meaning of the ending. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the notification icon to stay up to date on all the latest content, and click the like button to help appease the algorithm gods. Also, if you'd like to make a suggestion on what you want me to cover next, please don't hesitate to ask in the comments below.
This is Constantine, asshole.
John Constantine was born out of Alan Moore's extraordinary Swamp Thing run in the mid-1980s, which was redefining horror comics with literary ambition and political bite. Moore, with artists Steve Bissette and John Totalben, wanted a new kind of occult guide for Swamp Thing, someone who could operate as a street-level Virgil through DC's burgeoning supernatural mythology. Moore wanted a working-class magician who looked like Sting, and Totalben delivered a blonde, sharp-featured figure in a trench coat and loosened tie. A punkish cross between a union rep, a pub regular, and a man who's just seen something unspeakable. Constantine first appeared in the Saga of the Swamp Thing, issue number 37, as a mysterious, sarcastic advisor to Swamp Thing. Even in those guest appearances, he's manipulative, cryptic, and disturbingly well-informed. A fixer of the occult rather than a superhero.
John Constantine, I believe, is one of the greatest comic characters ever created.
Constantine was a bad boy, and people like bad boys.
Constantine was created by Alan Moore, whom many people consider to be the greatest writer in the comic book field.
When I took over, writing John Constantine and developing, I suppose my main concern was to do the character's potential justice.
What Jamie Delano did with the series when he first started writing the monthly book was to really create a past for him, give him a family. Jamie really played into the political atmosphere of the Thatcher-Reagan era of the 80s.
It was basically a parody of the rampant capitalism that was stepping on the gas, and it was a lot of fun to write and great characterising BMW driving yuppies as corrupt, greedy demons from hell and allowing Constantine to sort of beat them at their own game by manipulating the hellish stock markets.
By 1988, he'd been spun off into his ongoing series Hellblazer, which ran under DC's Vertigo imprint. Over 3 decades, that title, written by some of the best in the field, including Jamie Delano, Garth Ennis, Brian Azzarello, Mike Carey, and Peter Milligan, cemented Constantine as a supernatural anti-hero whose adventures mirrored the anxieties, politics, and moral ambiguities of the real world. What makes Constantine compelling is not just what he can do, but who he is. He is the archetypal bastard with a conscience, charming enough to draw people in, cynical enough to sacrifice them, and self-aware enough to hate himself for it later. Unlike the capes and demigods of mainstream DC, Constantine is a working-class Brit steeped in Thatcher-era disillusionment and punk sensibility. He swears, drinks, smokes constantly, and schemes. He despises authority, whether angelic, demonic, or governmental, and treats magic less like sacred art than like a dangerous trade he happens to be brilliant at.
When the time comes, I'll be the one to collect your soul.
The defining trauma of his life, the Newcastle incident, illustrates who he is perfectly. In an ill-conceived exorcism meant to impress his peers, Constantine attempted to banish a demon from a little girl named Astra. The ritual went catastrophically wrong. Astra was dragged to hell and Constantine was committed to Ravenscar Psychiatric Hospital. This single event haunts him through every subsequent story, shaping his guilt, his mistrust of magic, and his reflexive habit of outthinking rather than overpowering his enemies. Jamie Delano's early Hellblazer arcs, especially Original Sins, established Constantine as an exorcist whose adventures echo real-world social rot. Racism, neoliberalism, AIDS panic woven into urban horror. Garth Ennis's Dangerous Habits is the quintessential Constantine story. Diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, John outwits the three lords of hell into curing him, a scheme that combines desperation, gallows humor, and moral ruthlessness. The Family Man pits him against a mundane serial killer, showing that human evil can be just as horrific as the supernatural. Later arcs, such as Mike Carey's All His Engines or Peter Milligan's run, push him into global conspiracies and metaphysical dilemmas without losing the intimate personal cost of his choices. Across all these runs and more, the pattern is clear. Constantine wins, but never cleanly. He survives through manipulation, cunning, and sacrifice. Friends die, lovers are damned, and he walks away with another scar and another ghost.
Well, I guess we should have that chinwag about now.
Constantine's reputation as a magician sometimes misleads new readers who expect Doctor Strange-style fireworks. In truth, his greatest powers are intellectual and social, encyclopedic knowledge of occult lore, unshakable nerve, and the cunning of a world-class conman. But he does have a formidable magical arsenal, albeit one he deploys with restraint. Constantine is a master of ritualistic sorcery rather than flashy spellcasting. He can conduct exorcisms, summon and bind demons, create protective sigils, perform necromancy, astral projection, and scrying. He's adept at constructing elaborate magical traps and wards, often using improvised components. Chalk circles in alleyways, blood on a hotel floor, whispered incantations on the fly. Unlike most magicians in comics, Constantine rarely chants incantations and throws energy bolts. He prefers low-key, high-impact workings that turn the environment and his opponent's own nature against them.
I have to say, I don't fancy the new look, love. Makes you look a bit murdery. Oh, the old magic, that's the stuff. Cuts both ways, though.
John's most dangerous power is his ability to read the fine print of supernatural lore and to exploit it. He's fluent in multiple occult languages, angelic dialects, and demonic names of power. He can negotiate, bluff, and blackmail beings orders of magnitude stronger than himself. lords of hell, fallen angels, forgotten gods, and walk away alive because he's found a loophole they didn't consider. His mind is also his fortress. He's demonstrated strong resistance to telepathy, psychic manipulation, and demonic possession, partly through training, partly through sheer bloody will. He's a bit like John Wick in that regard. He also has occasional flashes of precognition or prophetic dreams, though these are unreliable and usually unwelcome. Over decades, he's acquired and crafted a small arsenal of magical tools, charms, talismans, and occult relics, but he's less reliant on gadgets than on improvisation. His inventory is always changing, reflecting the hustler's mentality of whatever works right now. Perhaps Constantine's true superpower is narrative survivorship. He lives in a world where everyone around him dies, yet he endures, not because he's lucky, but because he's ruthless, adaptive, and always thinking 3 moves ahead. This gives his stories their noir flavor. He wins like a con artist wins, at someone else's expense, and it eats at him. His abilities are manifestations of his worldview. In his hands, magic is a dirty trade that stains the soul. Every exorcism, every summoning, every contract has a cost. Even when he saves the day, he often does it by sacrificing someone else, and that moral compromise becomes the real horror of his stories. He's a magician who distrusts magic, a hero who hates heroics, a man who survives the apocalypse by becoming a little more like it each time. In a medium crowded with archetypes, Constantine remains unique because he's a bundle of contradictions. He's a working-class occultist with the cunning of a barrister, a trickster who hates being tricked, a cynic who occasionally performs acts of surprising bravery. He's defined less by victories than by scars, less by spells than by consequences. Alan Moore created him as a guide for Swamp Thing, but over time he became the embodiment of Vertigo's ethos: horror with intelligence, magic with politics, character with consequence. Where Superman represents hope and Batman fear, Constantine represents cost. The price of knowledge, of power, of trying to do good in a corrupt system. His powers are never clean, his conscience never clear. He's the cautionary tale of what happens when you know too much and care just enough not to walk away. Long before Constantine hit the screen in 2005 with its smoky Catholic guilt, apocalyptic noir aesthetic, and trenchcoat-clad Keanu Reeves squinting at demons, it was a property trapped in a very different kind of purgatory, the chaotic, ever-churning machine of Hollywood development hell. The journey from the gritty, politically charged pages of Hellblazer to a major motion picture was neither swift nor clean. In fact, the film that eventually reached audiences bore only a spectral resemblance to the comics that spawned it, having undergone a decade of creative reinvention, cultural reshaping, and studio tampering. But to understand how we got from London to Los Angeles, from blonde bisexual chain-smoking conman to Keanu Reeves' soulful exorcist, we have to go back to the late 1980s and 1990s, when comic book movies were still niche and Hollywood had little idea what to do with a character like John Constantine.
I love his humor. I mean, he's not the nicest guy. He was very film noir, and every day was this wonderful mixture of production design and cinematography and writing and performance. It was the best of what you hope for in making a movie.
John was not a traditional superhero. He was a trickster, a manipulator, a self-loathing bastard whose victories often came at the cost of his friends' souls. He didn't punch his way through problems, he talked, lied, cheated, and occasionally bled his way through them. This naturally was a problem for Hollywood. When Warner Brothers first optioned Hellblazer in the mid-1990s, they weren't entirely sure what they had. Constantine wasn't a character who fit into neat boxes. He wasn't family-friendly nor easily marketable. He chain-smoked like a chimney, told God to piss off, and ended more stories in despair than triumph. Yet the idea of a supernatural noir detective held a certain allure, and so studio executives began floating the idea of turning Hellblazer into a high-concept action thriller. That's when the compromise began. The earliest versions of the script bore little resemblance to the comics. Multiple screenwriters, most notably Kevin Broadbent and later Mark Bombach, took a pass at the material, trying to find a workable version of Constantine that could satisfy both comic book readers and mainstream audiences. Some drafts kept Constantine British and irreverent, others Americanized him entirely. At one point, Nicolas Cage was attached to play the role. Yes, Nick Cage. And while that might sound unhinged, it was still arguably more tonally consistent with the character's chaos than what came later.
What is it exactly with you and Bugs?
Not the beast! Ah!
Funny to you, but to the Fallen, that's like nails on a chalkboard.
The idea was always to make Constantine more palatable, less political, less caustic, more relatable, which in studio terms usually meant casting someone famous and setting it in a familiar American city. The project languished in limbo for years and directors came and went. Tarsem Singh, known for his lush visual style, was briefly attached. Guillermo del Toro flirted with the project but ultimately chose Hellboy instead. A telling decision as Hellboy would go on to become a far more faithful and successful comic book adaptation in terms of tone and character. The problem ultimately was one of identity. Was Constantine going to be a horror film, an action film, a religious thriller? Was it about demons, God and redemption, or just a series of creepy exorcisms and explosions?
Constantine is a guy who deals with archetypal good and evil represented in Judeo-Christian blah, blah, blah. But he's a total curmudgeon. He just fucking hates it. That was the hook. So everything gets really visceral, really gritty, and really cranky.
Things began to shift when producer Akiva Goldsman came on board. Fresh off the Oscar success of A Beautiful Mind and the earlier cinematic war crimes of Batman and Robin, Goldsman had clout at Warner Brothers, and he believed in the potential of Constantine as a supernatural thriller with commercial legs. Around this time, screenwriter Frank A. Capello submitted a draft that finally gelled with the studio's desires. It reimagined Constantine as an American exorcist based in Los Angeles, caught between heaven and hell in a bureaucratic spiritual war. It retained key elements, the lung cancer, the botched suicide attempt, the sarcastic streak, but removed much of the character's British identity, class commentary, and real-world political subtext. This version of the script laid the foundation for the film we got. It introduced Angela Dodson, a new character not drawn from the comics, whose twin sister's suicide serves as the film's inciting incident and anchors Constantine's investigation. It framed the spiritual war as one governed by rules and loopholes, with Constantine acting as a kind of magical litigator. Heaven and hell became more than metaphysical concepts, they were legal systems with paperwork. This thematic pivot gave the film a fascinatingly fatalistic tone, one that felt appropriate for the character, even if the details were drastically altered.
It was a huge learning experience, a huge opportunity to be able to do a movie.
You had no pressure, right?
No pressure, no pressure whatsoever. It took me 9 months to get the job. I had done primarily music videos, and I had to convince all these different people that I was responsible and had a vision, and my last meeting was gonna be Keanu.
Yeah.
But he had said, no music video directors. And so it was like,
Oh my God.
but
Yeah.
luckily, I passed the test.
Your take on the film, I liked it so much. I felt very confident in a way. It was just like, let's go.
It was around this time that director Francis Lawrence was hired to helm the film. A first-time feature director, best known for his glossy, high-concept music videos, Lawrence brought a strong visual eye and a keen sense of surreal imagery. Though he was not intimately familiar with Hellblazer, he was intrigued by the religious themes and wanted to craft a version of Constantine that felt like The Exorcist crossed with Blade Runner, painted in smog and fire. Lawrence's Los Angeles would become a recurring metaphor throughout the film, a city literally and spiritually on the edge of damnation, reflected in Constantine's own personal purgatory.
Smoking a cigar.
Is he inside?
What's always been really important to me was just the heart of this character and who he is and what makes him who he is.
We tried to sort of distill out the spirit of the source material. And enough of us have been through adaptations that have gone not the way we wanted them to be as careful as possible.
I was not familiar with the comic book at all until I started doing my research to put my presentation together. So I started reading some of the graphic novels, and it was there that I really sort of learned who Constantine was and what the heart of his character was.
With Lawrence on board, the production took shape quickly. The final rewrites began during this period, smoothing over exposition, fleshing out relationships and characters, and adding cinematic set pieces. Lawrence collaborated with Capello and Goldsman to maintain a sense of visual storytelling that emphasized mood and atmosphere over exposition. They borrowed from Catholic iconography, occult folklore, and Lovecraftian horror to create a world where angels and demons operated like mob bosses in tailored suits. In many ways, the pre-production phase of Constantine was a microcosm of what Hollywood does when it encounters subversive material. It dilutes it, repackages it, but occasionally, just occasionally, retains enough of the original spirit to create something worth watching. The Constantine that emerged from this long crucible wasn't the British anti-hero we'd read for decades, but he was still haunted, still doomed, and still angry at the rules of a game he didn't ask to play.
When we found out that Constantine was not going to be British, we were surprised. But Keanu Reeves turned out a wonderful performance.
I think the film's an extraordinarily good translation. Francis Lawrence and the team really went rather than to the iconography or the outer dressing of what the character is, to the essence of the attitude.
It's a guy who just has problems in general with the rules in the world, and he has problems in general with the idea of fate, that there are rules he has to live by, good and bad.
They're very different physical types, different nations of origin, but we tried to sort of distill out the spirit of the source material rather than the actual sort of physical representation. Our process with Keanu and Keanu's process with this movie was to do that, to sort of feel Constantine, and Keanu got this guy pretty quickly.
In the history and tradition of going from one form to any form, has always kind of brought about disappointments for people. But I think that the heart and soul of it, we've really tried hard to keep intact.
By the time the script had settled into a shootable draft, one of the most difficult decisions loomed. Who in hell or heaven was going to play John Constantine? For comic book fans, the answer was obvious. If someone like Paul Bettany or Gary Oldman had been cast in the late 1990s, purists might have wept tears of joy. But this was Hollywood in the early 2000s, and the studios weren't casting for faithfulness. They were casting for box office. Keanu Reeves had just concluded his run as Neo in the Matrix trilogy, and while critics had often poked fun at his wooden delivery, audiences loved him. He brought with him not only a face that sold tickets, but a curious, haunted quality that seemed just right. He wasn't sarcastic like the comic Constantine, nor particularly spiky or glib, but he was believable as someone who'd seen the abyss and come back broken. Francis Lawrence wasn't interested in an exact translation of the comic. He wanted a Constantine who was more grounded, melancholy, and cinematic. Keanu embodied that vision, subdued, burning inward, a man carrying damnation like a tumor.
The cast was stellar, top to bottom. Every performance is just unique and surprising and wonderful.
They're just these gods of cinema now.
The more extreme the subject matter and the characterization, angel, demon, etc., the more grounded the acting has to be. We were really fortunate to have extraordinary actors anchoring the movie.
In retrospect, the casting was heretical and brilliant in equal measure. Hardcore fans balked, understandably. It sounded sacrilegious, but Reeves's performance, while not Hellblazer accurate, was entirely consistent with the film's mood. His Constantine was still a terminally ill exorcist and a chainsmoker who tricked the devil and pissed off God. He was still damned and desperate for redemption, and most importantly, Reeves played him with the quiet fury of a man who hates himself more than the demons he exorcises. The supporting cast followed suit with a mix of inspired choices and head-scratchers. Rachel Weisz was brought in to play Angela Dodson, a composite character invented for the film. Weisz's natural intelligence and emotional range grounded the plot's metaphysical weirdness. As both a skeptical detective and the grieving sister of a supposed suicide victim, she gave the film a human anchor.
We were trying to find somebody that was believable as an LAPD detective, but also felt like they could inhabit this kind of supernatural, magical world. But it was really hard to find somebody that had kind of the combination of all of that. And then when we met with Rachel, I was like, okay, she could really do it. Plus, she's an amazing actress.
Then came the real scene stealers, Tilda Swinton as the androgynous Archangel Gabriel and Peter Stormare as Lucifer. Swinton's casting was pitch perfect, her porcelain face and clipped enunciation conveying both celestial authority and chilling detachment. Her Gabriel was not the benevolent angel of Sunday school, but a bureaucratic zealot who believed in human suffering as spiritual currency. Meanwhile, Stormare's Lucifer, barefoot in a white linen suit stained with tar, was pure anarchic delight. Creepy, smirking, and enthralling in equal measure, he delivered one of the best devil performances ever committed to film. Djimon Hounsou as Papa Midnight, a former witch doctor turned neutral club owner, brought gravitas to a role that might have been laughable in lesser hands.
Midnight, I think, is the closest to the comic, actually. I think Midnight was always an ally, adversary, that kind of guy that you don't quite trust, but yet at the end of the day, if you had to go into war with somebody, you'd go get him.
Gavin Rossdale, yes, the lead singer of Bush, was perhaps the oddest casting as half-demon Balthazar, oozing club trash menace and gelled hair, while Shia LaBeouf, fresh off Even Stevens and just before Transformers, played Chaz Kramer, reimagined from Constantine's teenage punk sidekick into a fast-talking apprentice.
Djimon was a first choice. Pruitt was a first choice too. Tilda was also my first choice for Gabriel, and luckily all these people said yes.
We had a lot of fun. Shia was great. One of my favorite shots and moments is with Djimon, with Midnight, and he blesses Chaz, then he turns to John, and John's just like, come on. And he just walks away,
yeah.
But he keeps going.
Right, that's right.
I love that. It was just so, we're just making stuff up, and it's just so fun.
Principal photography began in October 2003 in LA. As a first-time feature director, Lawrence leaned heavily into his strengths, mood, and visual texture. The film was shot almost entirely on location or within elaborate sets that mirrored the story's liminal nature. Constantine's world was decaying. His apartment, strewn with crucifixes and arcane sigils, felt like a bunker for a man waging an invisible war. Los Angeles was presented not as the city of angels, but as a halfway house between heaven and hell, soaked in amber and green hues. Cinematographer Philip Rousselet worked closely with Lawrence to cultivate a bleached, desaturated palette, giving the entire film a ghostly, nicotine-stained quality. The contrast between the smoggy, mundane earth and the rusted red surrealism of hell was stark but seamless. Religious iconography was ever present but never sermonized. Crosses, holy water, sigils, and Latin chants operated more like tools in an occult arsenal than objects of worship. If it burns demons, it has utility. One of the film's standout design choices was its vision of hell, a post-apocalyptic, windswept ruin echoing nuclear devastation. The production team, led by production designer Naomi Shohan in collaboration with Rhythm and Hues and Tippett Studio, envisioned hell as a blasted mirror of Los Angeles. To achieve this, they used practical dust effects, high-speed photography, and visual layering to make the flames and debris feel organic. The result was one of the most uniquely designed cinematic hells, more grounded in trauma and radiation than fire and brimstone. It was bleak, brutal, and unforgettable.
In the original version of the script that I read, hell was like a black void. It was like sort of oily floors and piles of bones and things like that. We had to find fresh ways into things like Satan, hell. And so in discussions with Akiva early on, wouldn't it be interesting if there was a hell version of where you are and a heaven version of where you are?
If you were in Brooklyn, New York, and then you transitioned, you would be in Brooklyn hell. And that liberated us. The hardest thing about any kind of fully imagined world is it could be anything. So once you give yourself some rules, it's a little bit more like coloring inside the lines.
Lawrence insisted on avoiding the typical CGI overload of the early 2000s, choosing instead to blend practical effects from Stan Winston's studio with digital enhancements. The exorcism scenes used a combination of prosthetics, wire work, and clever editing. And yet the effects were not always seamless. Some demons suffered from mid-2000s CGI rubberness, particularly in the swarm sequences and the face-peeling spirits, but the film wisely leaned into shadows, smoke, and sound to mask its budgetary limitations. The shoot was also not without its difficulties. Keanu Reeves was enduring chronic pain from a spinal injury, which would later require surgery. The PG-13 rating, which the MPAA rejected, resulting in a begrudging R rating, also meant many violent and visceral scenes were reined in or implied rather than shown, though the tone remained consistently oppressive and moody.
It's hard to do minimalist noir. I'm not even sure it's a genre. But this had this very take it for granted tone. I love the fact that the movie never bothered to try to explain itself. Since Constantine takes the world for granted, so does the film.
Brian Tyler and Klaus Badelt's score, along with the ominous sound design from Dane Davis, who worked on The Matrix, infused the film with a steady pulse of dread. The soundtrack never overplayed its hand. Instead, it subtly underlined the bleak, decaying urban hellscape Constantine inhabited. Chants, whispers, low industrial groans. It was less music and more oral haunting. The use of silence was equally powerful. Several of Constantine's confrontations, especially with Gabriel and Lucifer, were allowed to breathe, stripped of bombast. Just dialogue, performance, and the weight of eternal damnation. After months of shooting amidst dense fog machines, elaborate sets, and Keanu Reeves' perpetually raspy cough, Francis Lawrence and his editing team were faced with the task of balancing metaphysical horror, theological noir, and studio expectations, all within a digestible 2-hour runtime. The results were surprisingly great for a first-time feature director, but not without friction. The biggest bump in the road came courtesy of the MPAA. Constantine had been carefully designed to straddle the edge of a PG-13 rating. There was a limited gore, no F-bombs to speak of, and sex was non-existent. But the moment the MPAA watched the final cut, they slapped it with an R rating anyway. The reason? Tone. Not content, not violence, but an overall disturbing atmosphere, which is basically the ratings board's way of saying, this film creeps us out in a way we can't quite quantify, and we're gonna punish you for it.
You're fucked.
This blindsided Warner Brothers, who had hoped for a broader teen-friendly release, but instead of chopping the film to shreds, Lawrence and producers chose to embrace the rating. The film's oppressive, fatalistic tone, where salvation feels like a rigged game, was a major selling point, and scrubbing it for the sake of more ticket sales would have neutered the entire experience. So the R rating stayed, and Constantine wore it like a scar.
This is a guy who doesn't want to be a good guy. He doesn't want to really care about people because all it does is bring him pain. But there's something in him that can't let go. He has to help. And if he could cut that part of him out, he would. But he can't.
I think Keanu has a lot going on inside, and I believe that John Constantine has the same thing, and that he draws you into that. It's sort of the unsaid that is so intriguing about Keanu and about Constantine.
The fact that it's Keanu Reeves and nobody else playing this tortured individual, I think, is really a stroke of genius. Because he does have that angelic quality.
John Constantine's got strong morality. He's, trying to right some wrongs, and sometimes he doesn't quite go about it in the nicest way.
But the marketing campaign for the film was somewhat confused. Warner Brothers leaned heavily into the film's occult elements, but didn't quite know how to position it. Was it The Matrix with demons? Seven with magic? A superhero film with a trench coat? The trailers emphasized action more than theology, Keanu more than Constantine, and hinted at a romance that barely existed in the film. The posters were gothic and moody, often featuring Keanu walking solemnly through hellfire, cigarette in hand, though amusingly many promo images airbrushed the cigarettes out for international markets. The confusion extended to comic book fans who were divided. Die Hard saw it as a betrayal, but for casual moviegoers, the film looked stylish, weird, and just off-kilter enough to be intriguing. Constantine ultimately released in 2005 and opened at $29 million domestically in its first weekend, eventually owning over $230 million worldwide against a budget of roughly $100 million. It wasn't a blockbuster hit, but it wasn't a complete flop either, just one of those mid-tier films that quietly built a following over time. Critics were predictably split. Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 stars and praised its atmosphere and originality. Others dismissed it as muddled and self-serious. Fan reactions were equally mixed. Comic purists largely rejected it, while others, especially those unfamiliar with the source material, found it visually rich and thematically potent. But time has been kind to Constantine. In the years since, it has gained cult classic status and fans have reappraised Keanu's performance. The film's moody visuals and cynical spirituality now feel perfect, especially in an age oversaturated with quippy, bright-colored superhero movies.
It's been an interesting journey emotionally, I think, with this movie. We got by box office-wise. We didn't get the best reviews. You have this mixed, strange feeling when the movie comes out. And then it's just weird over the last 20 years. I would travel around the world and everybody would have Constantine DVDs. And you're like, wow, there's a lot of Constantine fans. And you just feel that sort of growing love for this movie. Rotten Tomatoes even put out articles on movies that Rotten Tomatoes got wrong, and
Oh yeah,
yeah, and Constantine's on there, and to just sort of feel that kind of change of perception of a movie is gratifying. The fact that maybe we can get some new audiences in, or just have a higher resolution version for the fans that have been loving this movie for the last 20 years, I think it's all really exciting.
It's a beautiful film to look at. It's superbly acted. It's wonderfully written.
And we had a really fun time making it.
And it's against all odds, too, right? It's against all odds. Keeping going.
Sure about this? No.
The story begins beneath the scorched earth of the Mexican countryside. A scavenger named Manuel stumbles upon a strange object buried in the ruins of a forgotten church, an ancient spearhead wrapped in the kind of cloth only reserved for Nazis and occult relics. Of course, it's not just any spearhead. This is the Spear of Destiny, the weapon said to have pierced the side of Christ as he was crucified. Within seconds of unearthing it, Manuel becomes possessed by an invisible force. His eyes glaze, his gait changes, and he's no longer a man. The spear doesn't just corrupt, it awakens something ancient and malevolent that immediately sets him on a path north, barreling toward the United States like an apocalyptic homing missile. Meanwhile, in the spiritual war zone that is LA, occult detective and full-time cynic John Constantine is up to his usual business, exorcising demons, antagonizing angels, and chain-smoking his way through existential dread. Constantine is not your typical hero, nor is he your standard-issue exorcist. He's a walking contradiction, a mortal man who's seen the underworld firsthand, yet can't seem to find peace in either direction. He carries himself with the disaffected grace of someone who's long since stopped pretending to be surprised by anything. A man cursed not just by lung cancer, but by the knowledge that his soul is already condemned to hell. Years ago, overwhelmed by his ability to see the true nature of things, half angels, half demons, John attempted to end his life. He was brought back, but the afterlife doesn't forget, and it certainly doesn't forgive. Constantine now operates in a world defined by cosmic rules. At the core is a metaphysical wager between God and Lucifer, a hands-off agreement that allows both sides to influence humanity without outright stepping onto the playing field. Demons and angels cannot manifest physically on Earth. Instead, they work through half-breeds, spiritual hybrids who walk among humans, nudging them gently towards sin or salvation. Constantine's unique gift, his ability to see these entities for what they are, has made him heaven's unofficial hitman and hell's most annoying ice agent. When Father Hennessy, played by Pruitt Taylor Vince, a friend and a troubled priest with a curse of supernatural hearing and a preference for self-medication, contacts Constantine about a disturbing possession case, John arrives with his usual swagger. The girl in question isn't just infected by some run-of-the-mill demon whispering sins into her ear. No, she's been used by a soldier demon actively trying to force its way into the physical realm, something that shouldn't be possible under the divine rules of engagement.
Listen, that exorcism wasn't right. Listen to the ether.
As a result, Constantine begins to suspect something far worse is brewing and asks Father Hennessy to use his gift to investigate what's happening. The spiritual balance is slipping, and no one upstairs seems to be picking up the phone. At the periphery of Constantine's exploits is Shia LaBeouf's Chaz Kramer, a murder-mouthed apprentice who desperately wants in on the action. But Constantine, gruff and dismissive, leaves him waiting in the car. Chaz is all enthusiasm and zero experience, the sort of sidekick who quotes rituals from books but hasn't yet seen what a demon looks like when it's crawling its way out of a 10-year-old.
You ever think if you told me more now, maybe I could help out?
Nope.
On the other side of town, Detective Angela Dodson, played by Rachel Weisz, is busy trying to make sense of her gift of always being able to know where the bad guys are and where to shoot, as if being guided by an unseen hand. After being told by a priest that God has a plan for her, she sleeps only to dream her sister's death. Angela's twin Isabel, a deeply devout Catholic, has leapt to her death from the rooftop of a psychiatric hospital. But nothing about the death feels right, least of all to Angela, who bumps into Constantine at the hospital.
Hold the door. You're going down.
And if I can help it.
John, it turns out, is dying of lung cancer, and nothing can be done to stop him from going to hell. It's here we're introduced to B-Man, a trusted ally and quartermaster of all things esoteric, played by Max Baker. B-Man, the eccentric armorer of the Arcane, arrives bearing gifts, relics with centuries of mythic gravitas. He arms Constantine with Dragon's Breath, an ancient flamethrower like aerosol capable of incinerating Hellspawn with holy fire. There's also the Shroud of Moses, now weaponized as a supernatural safeguard. Alongside these are bullet shavings from the failed assassination of the Pope, vials of holy water from the River Jordan, and a case of screech beetles from Amityville, which demons hate. This exchange is a tactical loadout scene dressed in supernatural robes, setting the tone for Constantine's brand of guerrilla spiritual warfare. It also deepens the world building, immediately positioning Constantine's war as one waged with ancient knowledge, artifacts of forgotten power, and the help of brilliant allies who work in the shadows. With the unholy violating the laws of heaven and hell, Constantine seeks counsel at a church from a higher source, literally. At the same time, Angela bumps into him once again, before pleading with her priest to allow Isabel to have a traditional Catholic funeral. Unfortunately, she's told that the rules are clear about suicide being a mortal sin, and there's nothing he can do to help her.
God was the only one she ever believed loved her.
It's here that John confronts the angel Gabriel, played with eerie calm and smug indifference by Tilda Swinton, a genderless, shimmering being who floats above the grime of Earth with the patronizing detachment of an immortal middle manager. Constantine pleads for time, for clemency, for a reprieve from his death sentence. After all, hasn't he done enough, exercised enough, suffered enough? Gabriel, ever the bureaucratic idealist, denies him, not because he's evil, but because his motivations are impure. Constantine, she argues, doesn't fight demons out of love for mankind or faith in the divine. He does it for himself.
Might consider giving me an extension.
Everything you've ever done, you've only ever done for yourself. And you're going to go to hell because of the life you took.
This denial is more than just a plot beat, it's a thesis statement. Constantine isn't about good versus evil or angels versus demons, it's about intent. The divine ledger cares about what you do, and more importantly, why you do it. Constantine can banish every demon on Earth, but if his heart isn't in the right place, it's still an unpaid debt.
I believe, for Christ's sake.
you know, and there's a difference.
As he leaves the church, John is then assaulted by a demon composed entirely of screeching insects and crustaceans called the Vermin Man, a sign that things are officially off the rails and the old rules of celestial engagement are starting to break down. Shaken, but never stirred, he pays a visit to Papa Midnight, the elusive voodoo kingpin and ex-witch doctor, played by the always commanding Jimon Honsu. Midnight now runs a supernatural speakeasy, a swanky, neon-drenched nightclub hidden in plain sight. This isn't just a goth rave with incense, it's a Switzerland for the damned, a neutral ground where half-breeds can knock back a drink without violating the divine wager. The place practically hums with demonic subtext and secondhand sin. Midnight, despite his wisdom and occult resources, isn't buying John's urgent claims that full-blooded demons are breaking through and physically manifesting on Earth, an act that would constitute a massive breach of heaven and hell's agreed-upon terms.
A demon just attacked me right out in the open.
They don't like you, John.
Their meeting escalates into a testy verbal joust, punctuated by a sneer from Balthazar, a half-demon played with relish and reptilian charm by Gavin Rossdale. Balthazar's presence is a red flag. He uses smugness, as if he's in on a cosmic prank no one else is ready for, and Constantine is forced to exit the club in a coughing fit, stonewalled yet again by the very allies who should be helping him.
I'll deport your sorry ass right where you stand.
Meanwhile, reviewing security footage of Isabel's final moments, Angela hears her sister utter a single name with clarity: Constantine, the same asshole she keeps bumping into. John's reputation in LA is something between urban myth and clerical nightmare. He's known among the more spiritually attuned members of the police force as a man who dabbles in exorcisms, spectral crimes, and the occasional flirtation with blasphemy. And so Angela seeks him out. Her skepticism is as thick as Constantine's cynicism, which makes for a deliciously antagonistic dynamic. one where faith, logic, and unspoken trauma are all clashing underneath.
Welcome to my life.
Isabel wouldn't have taken her own life.
Yeah, what kind of mental patient kills herself?
God damn you.
Constantine is unmoved and initially refuses to help her, until winged demons attack her in public and he's forced to explain the reality of the situation while saving her using the Shroud of Moses. These aren't half-breeds, but actual full-blooded, talon-swinging abominations flapping through the sky like the apocalypse is on clearance. Constantine, grimly confirming that something big is happening, agrees to help Angela investigate what really happened to Isabel. In a daring move, he promptly transports himself to hell with Isabel's cat and a bucket of water. It's a moment that perfectly encapsulates this film's blend of grounded ritualism and bombastic supernatural horror. John crosses into the infernal realm, and there, in the blasted wasteland of hell, he finds Isabel, damned to eternally reenact her death over and over again. As proof, he returns with a scorched hospital wristband, a literal receipt from hell. This is when John drops the reveal that Angela and Isabel are twins, a fact he hadn't known, but that deepens the spiritual stakes. In theological folklore and comic book mysticism alike, twins are often vessels of mirrored fates, dual souls destined for entangled destinies. Isabel may have fallen, but Angela might still be saved, or used. John takes the opportunity to explain to Angela why he's so deeply entangled in this world of exorcisms and damnation, how he attempted to take his own life, unable to handle the constant barrage of terrors his gift gave him, briefly dying before being revived by paramedics. As time halted in hell, his 2 minutes of death on earth lasted years down there. But because he committed a mortal sin, despite saving lives, fighting demons, and enduring with nothing but sarcasm and a lighter, Constantine is damned.
I'm a suicide. I've been hoping to get enough to ensure my retirement.
That experience made him an object of fascination in both heaven and hell. John had become this sort of loophole, a rogue agent with one foot in the spirit world and the other in a cancer-ridden body. He now operates as a guardian of balance, exorcising demons when they overstep and sending them back to hell not because he's pious, but because it's the only way he can sleep at night. He's not here to save souls, he's here to earn his own reprieve. What elevates all of this beyond mere exposition is how it's performed. Keanu Reeves imbues Constantine with a restrained rage and weariness that gives the film weight. His every line drips with bitterness because he knows exactly why the world is unfair, and he's been trying to game the system ever since. Rachel Weisz, on the other hand, gives Angela a grounded intelligence. She doesn't accept Constantine's world easily. The performance balances logic and faith in a way that makes her the audience's perfect avatar.
I guess God has a plan for all of us.
God's a kid with an ant farm.
As the spiritual chessboard continues to unravel and the barrier between realms wears thinner than Constantine's lungs, events take a decidedly sinister turn. Father Hennessy does as instructed and uses his ability to investigate Isabel Dodson's fate. Hennessy is a tragic figure, a devout priest whose sensitivity to the otherworldly has been dulled by alcohol and an overwhelming sense of spiritual fatigue. He's also one of the few mortals trying to do the right thing in a world where heaven and hell treat Earth like a sports bet.
The influence peddlers. They can only whisper in our ears.
The priest discovers a strange sigil appear on Isabel's wrist and realizes something truly dark is at play. Unfortunately, before he can pass the discovery along, he's visited by Balthazar. Exuding the smugness of a man who owns both stock in Armani and a punch card for soul corruption, Balthazar uses his powers to drown Hennessy in alcohol. It's one of the film's most visually unsettling deaths, a forced relapse taken to the supernatural extreme. When Constantine and Angela arrive at the scene, he discovers the symbol cut into Hennessy's palm, suggesting he died trying to tell him what he saw. The sigil then becomes their next breadcrumb in a trail that's starting to look more like a ritual summoning. Their next stop is Isabel's room at Ravenscar Psychiatric Hospital. There, Angela exhales onto the window pane and reveals an inscription, an invisible message reading Corinthians Act 17. It's an elegant bit of visual storytelling, both eerie and intimate, and it points them toward an apocalyptic prophecy buried within the Satanic Bible, the kind you don't find at your local Barnes & Noble, but is somehow still everywhere in Hollywood.
To
crossover, Memon would need divine assistance.
John calls up Beeman, who identifies the mysterious sigil as the mark of Memon, the son of Lucifer. According to the Doomsday Scripture, Memon is planning a hostile takeover of Earth, but even Hell's Trust Fund baby can't do it alone. He'll need two things: the help of a powerful psychic, indicating why he went after Isabel and why she took her life to deny him that power, and divine assistance, which is where things start to get really weird. But before Beeman can drop more information, he tells John that while he may not have faith, they have faith in him, moments before he's killed. Angela finally admits she too was psychic just like her sister. As children, Angela and Isabel were both attuned to the spiritual realm, but while Isabel leaned into it, Angela did everything she could to suppress it. Fearing institutionalization and electroshock therapy, the same fate that befell her sister, she buried her gift and eventually forgot she had it. In a move that perfectly encapsulates John's grim resourcefulness, he helps Angela reawaken her ability by reconnecting her to her latent psychic powers.
You have to be fully submerged.
For how long?
As long as it takes.
The sequence serves as a kind of spiritual baptism, and Angela emerges changed, finally seeing the world the way Constantine and Isabel do. Now fully attuned, she picks up a new lead that points directly to Balthazar.
So much here.
They track him down and John finally gets to cut loose. Armed with holy brass knuckles and righteous fury, he beats the smug right off Balthazar's face, and in doing so, he gets answers. Memon, it turns out, has not only now picked Angela as his psychic host, but has also gotten his claws on the Spear of Destiny, which is soaked in divine blood. That's the help from God part of the prophecy. With the spear and the psychic, Memon has everything he needs to be born into our world and to turn Earth into his own personal hellscape. But before Constantine can act on this new intel, Angela is abducted by an unseen force. Finally convinced that the apocalypse is not only nigh, but already RSVP'd, Constantine returns to Papa Midnight. This time, he demands help, and Midnight, seeing that the even balance is tipped into chaos, relents and aids Constantine in locating Angela. The climax then begins at Ravenscar. John loads up with the relics, weapons, and grim determination, and is also joined by Chaz. What follows is a stylized battle against half-breeds, waged with crucifixes, holy guns, and righteous fury. The pair fight their way to Angela's body, attempting to perform an exorcism that will expel Memon before the Hellspawn is fully born.
Not bad, kid.
They succeed briefly until Chaz is hurled around the room by an invisible force and killed. With John also flung across the room, his worst suspicions are confirmed in the most gut-wrenching way. The true mastermind behind the chaos isn't Memon, it's Gabriel. Tilda Swinton's portrayal of Gabriel had always teetered between serene and unnerving, but here it fully tips into divine horror.
It'll bring you pain, so that you may rise above it.
Disgusted by God's unconditional love for humans, who she saw as flawed, petty, ungrateful creatures, Gabriel has decided that humanity needs to suffer to earn redemption. And what better method than triggering hell on Earth? Yep, this bitch is crazy.
You're insane.
Armed with the Spear of Destiny and a fanatic's certainty, she prepares to use the divine relic to carve Memon free from Angela's body and give him shape on Earth. It's here that John plays his final card by cutting his wrists. It's not an act of cowardice, but the ultimate act of sacrifice, because he knows exactly what this means. This is the mortal sin that damned him once already, but this time it's a gambit. Just as the light begins to fade and time slows to a syrupy crawl, Lucifer himself arrives, not with fire and brimstone, but with polish and poise. Peter Stormare's portrayal is easily one of cinema's most memorable devils. Barefoot in a spotless white suit, black tar oozing from his feet, smiling with the serene malice of a man who owns your mortgage and your soul. This is not the cartoon Satan with pitchforks and horns. This is bureaucracy meets sadism, old money in hell's oldest bank. He's here because Constantine is special. This is the soul that cost him countless others, the one that slipped his grip years ago. the one described by many, including Papa Midnight, as the only soul that he would come up here to claim himself. But John, smug even while dying, doesn't beg, he doesn't plead. He tells him exactly what's going on, that his own son Memnon is trying to overthrow him, using Gabriel as a midwife. Naturally, Lucifer is livid, not just because his son is trying to steal his throne, but because someone else is moving pieces on his board. So he confronts Gabriel directly, and what follows is a magnificent reversal. The angel attempts to smite Lucifer in the name of heaven, only to find that her power has been revoked. Her divine protection has been nullified. Her wings, those ethereal symbols of superiority, are burned off with a flick of hellfire, reducing her to a mere mortal. She's cast out, not just from heaven, but from the center of her own delusion.
Father?
Meanwhile, Memnon is banished back to hell with the ease of a father crowning his son. The apocalypse has been cancelled and order is restored, but before he goes, Satan, in a rare moment of gratitude, grants Constantine a wish. Anything he wants, and here's the twist. He doesn't ask to live, he doesn't ask for power or money or even a second chance. He asks for Isabel's soul to be released to heaven. John, in a single moment of true selflessness, buys her freedom with his soul. And that's when the unthinkable happens. He begins to ascend, literally. Heaven opens its gates, light envelops him, he floats upward, arms outstretched and finally redeemed through intent. But furious at being outplayed, Lucifer does the pettiest and most brilliant thing imaginable. He reaches into Constantine's chest and pulls the cancer from his lungs. In doing so, he heals Constantine out of spite. If Constantine lives, he can still sin, he can still fall, he can still lose. It's the cruelest miracle imaginable, denied heaven not because he isn't worthy, but because hell isn't done with him yet.
Your soul truly belongs in hell.
And as for Gabriel, now mortal, stripped of her vanity, she tries one last trick, provoking Constantine into killing her, a desperate bid for martyrdom, but John, in one of his finest moments, simply punches her in the face.
That's called pain. Get used to it.
The aftermath is both triumphant and melancholic. Constantine retrieves the Spear of Destiny, ensuring that no celestial relic of such power remains in play. Angela, who survived the ordeal and rediscovered her spiritual strength, becomes the new guardian of the Spear. John tells her to hide it, somewhere no one will ever find it, not even himself, because in a world where angels conspire and demons plot, even holy relics are better off buried. We also learn that Constantine is chewing gum, not smoking. It's a subtle but powerful image that highlights his character arc. In the film's post-credits scene, John visits the grave of Chaz. As John reflects, Chaz appears, reborn in angelic form, ascending silently into the stars above.
It's just a different type of hero, it's a different type of villain, and it's a different type of human, and it's a different type of character, and it's a different type of movie. It all fits.
It's been good fun.
Rumors of a sequel have persisted for over a decade. Keanu has repeatedly stated his interest in returning to the role. Director Francis Lawrence confirmed that a script had been discussed, and Peter Stormare has cryptically teased a return to his Satan. In a recent interview, Keanu even mentioned the studio had been delivered a second draft and that he remains hopeful. Whether or not a sequel ever materializes, Constantine may not be accurate to Hellblazer, but it captures the feeling of existential despair, spiritual bureaucracy, and damnation you can taste. It's a noir horror film in superhero clothing, a meditation on guilt dressed up as an exorcist action flick, and against all odds, against purist backlash, marketing confusion, and the ever-watchful eye of the MPAA, it worked.
I guess there's a plan for all of us. I had to die twice just to figure that out.